If you just do it, it'll turn out okay. And this season finale has been one of the hardest to schedule for a long time. But luckily, we got it down, even though I kind of overslept a bit because I'm not used to I'm not used to having it this early. But anyways, welcome to season finale of Talking Time with Caffeine. Like like this podcast was almost chaotic. The Republic of Rome is getting a little chaotic a little bit too.
Yep. The I I don't want the stability of the Roman Republic begins to fall apart now. Like the Roman Republic was always sort of unstable, but uh, it gets a little crazy how unstable it gets now with no real powerful outside competitors, and even technically there are some powerful outside competitors, but they still sort of like fight amongst each other.
So I think at this point, I may be wrong, but I think that okay, we've just defeated the Carthage, right? So,
Hmm.
so the biggest ones are whoever the former Persians, the former Persians, whatever they're called now, the Egyptians.
So you got the Ptolemies in Egypt. The Seleucid Empire is falling apart actually. So you've got a bunch of successor states going around in there. There's Armenia, which is taking some of that territory, and there's also this kingdom called Pontus, which comes up later. Um, you also have Parthia starting to take control of Persia at this time. So those are the main competitors. Everything to the west is um, small kingdoms of uh, what the Romans would call barbarians. Uh, Same to the north. You've got the kingdom of Numidia in Africa, but other than that, there's no real major Mediterranean rivals to Rome, and none that want to like control the whole Mediterranean.
Right.
So the news the last couple of days has been filled with uh, a new conflict coming about a little bit. Because Venezuela decided to hold a vote on Sunday, um, on whether they were going to listen to the arbitration courts, and if they were going to annex this area called Essequibo in their neighboring country of Guyana. Um, this is because the arbitration court, which is going to decide who gets Essequibo, is going to be making a ruling soon. People are just saying, "Oh, it's because the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, is unpopular." No, it's because they're going to be making a decision soon on who gets to own this area. So he's just trying to um, he's trying to preempt that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
for the longest time, Venezuela did not care about this area, but in the 2010s, just off the coast of Guyana, they found oil, uh,
Ah,
lots and lots of oil.
yeah.
Guyana is one of the fastest growing economies in the world because of this. And yeah, uh, so Venezuela has a claim to it because Spain and then the Spain claimed it this area for a while had like a bunch of competing border claims. Guyana also has a competing border claim with the country to the east of it, Suriname, but they don't really care all that much because there's nothing really there. And then when the Spanish Empire was collapsing, there was this country formed by Simón Bolívar called Gran Colombia, which included Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, and Venezuela, which claimed Essequibo, but never really owned it. Um, the British ended up coming in and taking Essequibo, and in 1895, I'd like to say, there was a crisis over it. I and America decided to make a decision for Venezuela and the United Kingdom, and they chose for the United Kingdom. And after that, Venezuela didn't really care all that much. You get a reflaring of this conflict during the rise of Hugo Chavez. However, it seems Fidel Castro told him, calm the fuck down, and he backed down. But then they found oil, and of course, now it's a problem.
So
Because,
is this different from the Falkland Island thing?
uh, not really. Um, because, yeah, the Spanish and then the Argentinians claimed the Falklands, but they never really controlled the Falklands. Um, the president of Venezuela, Maduro, has been saying that Guyana is a colonialist state, which is funny because most of Guyana is not made up of white people like you would think of if you're making that claim. It's actually mostly made. It's a pretty ethnically diverse country. There's no real majority. You actually have a lot of people from India that live there, uh, surprisingly, that came over because of the British Empire, but not very many white people. So, uh, while it's working with some of the more crazy people in that are quote unquote anti-colonialist, it doesn't really bear out. Also, as you can see, there there's only one real workable road that goes through Essequibo, and it starts in Brazil, and that is on purpose. Guyana knew that it would never be able to fight off Venezuela, so it never really built up the area and made it so that Venezuela can't really invade all that easily. If it wants to invade, it's going to have to either come from this. It's going to need to do a naval operation or invade Brazil in order to invade Guyana. So yeah, I guess we'll see what happens with this one.
Eh,
Yeah.
but meanwhile, in the past,
So our first major figure that we are going to be talking about is Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus. Uh, he's from an aristocratic plebeian family. He was born in 163 BCE and was son of the consul by the same name, Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, and his mother was Cornelia, who was the daughter of Scipio Africanus from the last episode. His sister Sempronia would marry Scipio Aemilianus, who was a descendant of Scipio Africanus through adoption. Um, In the Third Punic War, he'd serve under his brother-in-law Scipio Aemilianus, and he was one of the first to scale Carthage's walls. In 137 BCE, he would campaign in Spain. The campaign would go horribly for the Romans. They'd get surrounded, and his father had campaigned in Spain, but was seen as friendly to the local people. So through that, he was able to save the Roman army through negotiation. Uh, but when he returns to Rome, the Senate scraps this negotiation, and the leader of the army, somebody else, not got Tiberius, is forced to go back, and the war continues and stuff like that. But we're not going to care about that. We're mostly going to care about what happens to Tiberius in 133 BCE.
Yeah, so these are like two powerful families marrying to each other at this point. Of
Yeah, yeah, uh he's not he is not some kind of a commoner. He is a plebeian, but he is connected to some of the most powerful people in Roman history. So some modern people are like, "Oh, he's a Democrat." No, he's he most likely was just trying to further his own political career, and it just didn't work. So in 133 BCE, he was elected plebeian tribune. Um, a lot of issues were happening within Roman society at this time for the poor. Uh, Wage labor was scarce, grain prices were high, population growth was excessive, and there was a declining willingness to serve in the military, because you're no longer getting these massive campaigns against rich kingdoms. You're getting uh, campaigns against poorer areas, so you're not getting as much loot. There's no real reason to go, and property requirements essentially means that if you're if you are selected to serve, you have to serve. So they're moving to the cities so that they no longer get those property requirements, exacerbating the population growth issue within Rome. Meanwhile, if you decide to keep your farm, partable inheritance, essentially splitting your farmstead amongst your sons equally, had led to farm plots being too small to actually live off of, and the unemployment of many farmers. Um,
and plus, from the video, I heard that this is the time they started importing slaves to do some manual labor on farms.
yeah, that was also a thing. And you have these real rich people that are holding lots of land for themselves using slaves, which makes it harder for the poorer people, even if they want to stay on their farms, which a lot don't. So Tiberius sees this as his way of rising through the ranks, essentially. Uh, and there's this thing called the Ager Publicus. These are lands taken from local allies that the Romans allowed their allies to hold on to these lands. They're also lands taken from conquests, uh, and so this is where Tiberius is going to try to he's going to try to use this as a way to get people land. In his law called the Lex Agrario, um, this would enforce a limit on the amount of public land that ager publicus that somebody could own. And if you violated it, the surplus land would be taken from you and given to poor Roman citizens so that they had land to use. Um, this was his way of solving overpopulation in Rome and helping people meet property requirements to serve in the army. Uh, it would create a commission staffed by him, his brother Gaius Sempronius Gracchus, and his father-in-law Appius Claudius Pulcher. Um, of course, because the senators are the ones who hold most of this ager publicus and most definitely hold more than the uh, 120 hectares that they were only allowed to have under the Lex Agraria, were very much against this. And because of this, usually in order to propose a law to the people, you'd have to go to the Senate first. He decides to completely bypass the Senate and just go to the people. So the senators would find one of because there's multiple plebeian tribunes elected at once, and one of them was Marcus Octavius. Yes, he is related to the later Emperor Augustus, but here he's on the side of the Senate, and he vetoes every bill brought forward by Tiberius, even after there are concessions in order to try to help this get passed. Um, he ends up Tiberius ends up deciding to shut down the Roman treasury, and even after that doesn't work to get Octavius to stop, he uses the popular assembly uh, to vote to depose Octavius, and Tiberius supporters drag Octavius away, and then the bill is finally passed. This, by the way, is most definitely illegal. So yeah,
Parts of that happen in America today.
yeah. Because of this, the Senate would allocate very little money to the commission so that they couldn't do the work that they needed to do. Um, uh, there was a Roman ally in Asia called Pergamon. The king of the king of Pergamon died in 133 BC, and he bequeathed his entire kingdom and treasury to Rome. And Tiberius is like, "Hey, can we use this money to finance the commission?" Uh, and this sort of makes the senators a little antsy. They don't like that very much. One senator would accuse Tiberius of holding regal ambitions because of this, and that senator's name is Quintus Pompeius, and yes, he's related to Pompey the Great. But that guy, oh shit, sorry, that guy's for later. Pompey the Great. Uh, a lawsuit would be filed for Tiberius' illegal deposition of Octavius. However, as long as Tiberius is plebeian tribune, he cannot be um, he cannot be prosecuted for anything because magistrates have political immunity in Rome. So he would stand for re-election, which, by the way, is probably illegal. Um, a lot of illegal things that Tiberius is doing in order to get his stuff done. So when the vote is being done, him and his entourage would seize the Capitoline Hill leading the Senate under the Pontifex Maximus Publius Cornelius Scipio Nasica Serapio. Yes, that is a very long name. And also Tiberius' cousin. But he would pull his toga over his head to frame the action he is about to commit as a religious rite. Um, and he'd lead a mob to the Capitoline Hill that would kill Tiberius and his entourage and throw them in the Tiber River, which is kind of poetic because Tiberius uh, the name Tiberius is derived from the river Tiber, so a little bit poetic there. By the way, with Scipio Nasica Serapio, uh, names like this uh, kind of become a sticking point to many conservative Romans. They think that names like this are showing the decline of the republic. They don't like that you have multiple cognomen. Uh, why do you need three cognomen? You're being a little bit you're being a little bit self-indulgent uh, at this point. They don't like that. They think it's decadent, and Romans really care about decadence. Conservative Romans. Um, the Lex Agraria would not be repealed and would actually um, we actually see a lot of evidence that it did a lot of work to give out land and stuff. But uh, yeah, Tiberius, that was his. This is like the first time mob violence really happens within the city of Rome. So, first sign of decline of the republic, kind of thing.
Inner
So this is gonna be our next dude, Gaius Sempronius Gracchus, the brother of Tiberius. He was born in 154 BCE. He was one of the commissioners on his brother's land redistribution. He kind of keeps his head low. He campaigns in Spain. He campaigns in Sardinia, an island in the Mediterranean. But in 123 BC, he's elected plebeian tribune. Uh, and that's going to be the next slide.
That was a quick slide.
Yeah. So Gaius would do a lot of reforms. He would also make symbolic uh, gestures, like no longer speaking towards the Senate like tribunes before him, but instead directing his speeches towards the Forum, which is on the complete opposite side of the Senate, symbolically turning away from the Senate. He passed many popular laws, reenacting his brother's law. This would there's not much ager publicus left, and this hurt uh, Rome's Italian allies a lot. They become incredibly discontented with this. They're seeing themselves lose economic power, even though they are some of the biggest. They're the ones mostly fighting for Rome's empire, and now they're being stripped of land by Roman aristocrats. Which, by the way, people try to make Gaius out to be a Democrat. He was not. He was a proud aristocrat. He just Romans do lots of things in order to gain political power and have a name for the future, kind of thing.
Now, was this
It's one of the things.
was
What?
this like one of the first times that they tried to give Roman citizens to people that don't live in Rome?
What?
I,
Oh, are you? Yeah, because he's caused issues with the Italian allies. He proposes instead to start creating colonies in foreign territory for the Roman citizens that he's trying to help uh, through reenacting his brother's law. Um, and he also wants to give the Latins Roman citizenship and the Italians Latin rights, which essentially just makes them Roman citizens without the ability to vote. So yes, this is the first time we get that, but that's incredibly unpopular and does not get passed. It gets vetoed by one of his own allies. They don't like that. Um, he would also empower the equestrian class because these are the people that are rich but not rich enough to be in the Senate. Instead of Senate, instead of the Senate having authority over the courts, Gaius's reforms would put equestrians in control of the courts. However, one of the colonies that Gaius wanted to make was in Carthage, by the way. He also would be elected without standing for election in 122 BCE. The people elected him without him even standing for re-election. But in 121 BCE, he he stands for that election. But violence breaks out while he's making a sacrifice for the creation of a new colony. An attendant jeers at Gracchus, and this causes Gracchus and his entourage to kill the attendant. Um, with and the one of the consuls at the time, Lucius Opimius, summons the Senate to talk about this and what they're going to do about it. And the Senate passes what is called a Senatus Consultum Ultimum, which essentially means we're going to have the right to kill you and raise an army to kill you. And that's what they do. They raise an army and they go over and they kill Gracchus and his followers. And ultimately, this is the end of the Gracchi brothers, but just the beginning of Rome's problem, the Republic's political issues. So let's talk about two men that are going to dominate the rest of our story. This one is Gaius Marius. He was born in 157 BCE to a wealthy family but not one that's in the privileged classes. Gaius Marius was what's called a novus homo. He is a new man, something that uh, the later republic has, because a lot of senators died during the Second Punic War. This opens up the chances for for citizens with some riches to come in and make themselves into new men, like Gaius Marius would. Gaius Marius will be related to a future person that will be important for our story, a man named Julius Caesar. Um, Gaius Marius would be the leader of one of the political parties of the time called the Populares. The Populares, um, I wouldn't really call them uh, pro people. They just like they like being able to use the citizens' assembly um, uh, to override the power of the Senate a bit. And their opposition party loves the Senate and does not like the popular assembly and the plebeian tribunes. They're called the optimates, and they will be led by the next guy.
Right.
Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Um, he's related to all the other Cornelians that we've talked about. Uh, and he was born in 138 BCE. However, he was born into an impoverished branch of this family that had very little money. And by the time he is an adult, essentially he has nothing. He makes his life amongst the actors of the city, uh, but somehow he mysteriously gains a fortune later on in life and enters into politics. And
As you do when you get rich.
yeah, especially in Rome, because Roman politics, you need lots of money to do it. Uh, he will later become the leader of the Optimates. He does not like the popular assembly, and he will have a rivalry with Marius that will dominate the rest of our little thing here. And the first time they meet is in the next slide. The next slide.
All right.
So during the Second Punic War, the Carthaginians would use a people called the Numidians to help them out as cavalry throughout the campaign. And this cavalry absolutely terrorized the Romans. One of the major reasons why the Romans lost at the Battle of Cannae, and Scipio Africanus would ultimately use an exiled noble from Numidia in order to turn the Numidian cavalry against Carthage. This guy's name is Massinissa, and he would help get Massinissa onto the throne of Numidia to gain cavalry support against the Carthaginians. In 149 BCE, Massinissa dies, leaving his throne to his son, Micipsa. Uh, And this is where the problems with Numidia begin because Micipsa has three potential heirs. His two sons, Adherbal and Hiempsal the first, and his illegitimate nephew, Jugurtha. Jugurtha was a very cunning individual, um, very good at war kind of individual, and he would campaign in Spain alongside Scipio Aemilianus. And during this time, he gains a lot of friendships amongst the Roman aristocracy. Uh, and sort of this uh, concerns Micipsa because his own sons aren't very bright. Uh, so he ends up adopting Jugurtha in an attempt to ensure that Jugurtha will not usurp his sons, making all three kings of Numidia. That, of course, does not really work out upon his death in 118 BCE. Jugurtha quickly declares war on the two brothers. He would assassinate Hiempsal, and Adherbal would flee to Rome. So while Adherbal is in Rome, he asks the Senate for help because the Senate were the securities for Micipsa's will. The ex-consul Lucius Opimius, who had led the events against Gaius Gracchus, thus would decide to divide Numidia between Jugurtha and Adherbal. Jugurtha, who would loved who loved using bribes against the Roman Senate because it's really expensive to be a politician in Rome. So I'm just going to give you guys money, and then you guys can help me out. So he is given the more fertile and more populated western part, while Adherbal is given the eastern part, which is a lot less productive, giving Jugurtha an
But
edge.
that's funny, though. You're saying because in a thousand years or so, that's totally gonna reverse it around, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, later on, it's the Eastern Roman Empire that's lasts longer and is more richer and stuff for a long time.
Oh yeah, well the East was always more rich, but this is just within Numidia. Um,
Okay.
the West was always poorer, and as soon as Rome takes Greece, the East is essentially the economic power of powerhouse of the Romans, uh, and why quickly power shifts to the East within the Roman Empire. But yeah, yes, bribery can only go so far, and that will eventually lead to war. Um, so in 113 BCE, after building up his strength and assuming that he's built up his safety net amongst the Roman senatorial class by bribing them, Jugurtha declares war against Adherbal, who flees to a city called Cirta. Um, Throughout this time, many of the Roman equestrians settled in Africa in order to trade in because North Africa is one of the nexuses of trade. So there's a lot of Roman equestrians in Cirta who ally with Adherbal. Uh, this becomes a problem when Jugurtha takes the city uh, because Jugurtha ends up killing Roman citizens because they were on the side of Adherbal. So here's where bribery can only go so far. Jugurtha desperately does not want Rome to join this war, but Rome joins the war now. Um, and while this is bad, early on, Jugurtha does well. Jugurtha's got mobility on the Romans. He ambushes the Romans many times. He does bribe Roman commanders to just leave sometimes. That does lead to corruption trials back in Rome. And things just aren't going very good for Rome in the area. Um, but in 107 BCE, a certain man called Gaius Marius is elected consul, and he would arrive in the area. He would ultimately start making progress by besieging cities, but he got a little bit too close to the kingdom of Mauritania over there. The king of Mauritania was, I think, the brother-in-law of Jugurtha, so he decides it's time for me to join in the war. This nearly leads to disaster for the Romans as they're forced to go up on some hills and form rings and fight off the enemy. But they're eventually the Numidians and the Mauritanians get tired, and the Romans decide to attack Jugurtha's capital. On the way, the Mauritanians and the Numidians are attacking Marius's flanks. So the leader of the cavalry is sent out to defeat uh, the harassing. Numidians and Mauritanians, and his name is Lucius Cornelius Sulla.
Hmm.
And he's able to rout the enemy. Sulla would then return, smashing into the Numidian infantry, winning the battle, and through his friendships with many in the court of Mauritania, he's able to get the king of Mauritania to hand over Jugurtha, at which Jugurtha will be sent to Rome and eventually killed in a triumph that Marius holds. Um, but as you can tell by the fact that Marius gets the triumph, Marius gets all the credit for the win, even though Sulla was the main reason why they won. Beginning this sort of, Sulla's a little irked by this, and this will carry on to future stuff.
So like I did all the work, you get all the credit thing.
Yep. As the Jugurthine War is happening, um, some Germanic tribes begin migrating south. Nobody really knows why. We just know that they begin moving south. These are the Cimbri, Teutones, and Ambrones. Um, this war begins in 113 BCE when a consul decides, "Oh, I can defeat these guys really easily. They're harassing Roman allies. I'm gonna go defeat them." And he would intentionally spark up issues with the Germans in order to get the war to happen, but he gets defeated. Uh, so that didn't really work out for him. Uh, and I'm pretty sure he'd get prosecuted for this too later on. So yeah, Roman politics makes you do rash things in order to get prestige, and that didn't really work out for him. I think his name was Carbo, uh, and the Germans would just go around in Gaul, messing around with the different people there, going down into Spain and stuff. Not really messing with the Romans, and the Romans are now more dealing with Jugurtha in the south. But in 105 BCE, with Jugurtha defeated, the Romans think that they can go back and fight uh, these guys who are messing around, and they get they get 80,000 men together and go into southern Gaul to fight them. Uh, this would lead to one of the greatest defeats in Roman history, the Battle of Arausio, which uh, probably was actually more devastating than the Battle of Cannae. You already have manpower issues being caused by people not wanting to fight in these wars anymore. People still pretty poor, not holding any land. Uh, so the traditional manpower of the Romans is now essentially wiped out. Fear would grip the Romans, thinking that the Germans were going to come and sack Rome. They decide to actually go into Spain a little bit instead, which is really weird. And they would electing dictators was no longer something they liked to do anymore. After Fabius during the Second Punic War. So
Yeah.
instead, they elect Marius, who did a really good job in Africa, um,
Well,
and
and they
they,
were and they were right. The Germans did come and sack Rome like 500 years later.
yeah, Marius gets elected consul for 5 years in a row, which is illegal, but the Romans at this point do not care. They're scared. Um, so Marius was able to get property requirements scrapped, uh, so that he could raise his army, and this begins the process of making Roman legions into professional fighting forces instead of um, citizen militias, to get past the problem of not wanting to fight in these wars because the booty isn't good enough anymore. We're now going to just pay you. Um, and later on, you'll get benefits if you're from the provinces, but you're not a Roman citizen. If you fight in the army for a certain amount of time, you get Roman citizenship, which is very important to get Roman citizenship, especially as Rome becomes like the major, like the only power in the area. You get to benefit from the Roman Empire and everything. So Marius would take this army, defeat the Teutones and Ambrones at Aquae Sextiae first, and then the Cimbri finally decided that they were going to invade Italy. And at this point, their allies are dead, and Marius is able to defeat them at Vercellae, ending the crisis and ending the Cimbrian Wars. So, yeah. Marius gets a lot of glory. And he likes the glory. He really likes the glory. This will cause issues. But next slide.
All right. Lori is good.
So we were talking about how the Italian allies were getting a little angry at Rome uh, because they were taking their land and stuff. The Italian allies were some of the hardest hit in the wars for empire. They were the ones that were really the backbone of the army fighting for Rome, but they never really ever got the benefits of these wars. And
These
now
are
they're getting their what?
these were the first ones that got conquered too. When Rome.
Yeah. And now they're having their land stolen from them. And you start getting this buildup of resentment and uh, this buildup for war. In 91 BCE, a dude named Marcus Livius Drusus, whose descendants will later become emperors, either his descendants or his cousins. I didn't make sure the family tree thing, but yeah. Um, uh, so he would attempt to give the Italian allies citizenship in order to avert the upcoming crisis, but this was unpopular and rejected because Romans were chauvinists. Which is funny because later on Italians were seen as Romans and they'd get chauvinistic too. But it's just this. The Romans began finding out about things the Italians were doing that were signaling war, like exchanging hostages to ensure that the alliance is kept. This is a common practice amongst the Italians to ensure alliances hold up throughout a war and you don't get separate pieces. Um, so the Romans send a praetor, Quintus Servilius, to tell them to stop it, and the Italians kill him, and this begins the social war. Brutal fighting because both usually the Romans were fighting people that fought differently to them. The Italians fought just like the Romans because they've been the ones fighting mostly. So just brutal fighting. Marius and Sulla are involved, stuff like that. Political crises will happen including um, when Sulla becomes consul in 89 BCE, stuff yeah, stuff will happen when Sulla becomes consul in 89 BCE, but that will be for later in the next slide. Essentially, it's a big giant stalemate. The Romans cut the Allies in two, and eventually, by like I think 87 BCE, somewhere around there, they win the war, but they have to give up. They have to give the Italian allies citizenship, but their way around Italians now having influence in Roman politics is uh, in Roman elections, you had multiple different tribes and they would vote at different times. The more prestigious your tribe was, uh, the earlier in voting you voted, and the more influence over the elections you had. Um, the Italian allies would be given the final slot, meaning that they had the least power over the situation.
So
Um,
unless they were really divided in the first few votes, their vote didn't count that as much at all.
yeah, but you still now get particip, participation in the Roman system. You get the legal benefits, economic benefits, but yeah, electoral benefits not so much. So there's this dude in the east who leads this kingdom called Pontus. His name is Mithridates the Sixth. He comes to power in 120 BCE and focuses on expanding his kingdom throughout Anatolia and into Crimea, as you can see, becoming a Black Sea empire. His traditional enemies were Cappadocia in the south and Bithynia. Um, uh, and There'd be lots of problems in here. And Rome, of course, doesn't want one power becoming too powerful in the area. So they're trying really hard to keep Bithynia and Cappadocia independent from Pontus, multiple times intervening. In 90 BC, I think actually 91 BCE, Nicomedes the third of Bithynia dies. He had two sons. One was his legitimate son, Nicomedes the fourth, but the other one was his bastard, Socrates Crestus, who would be supported by Mithridates, who would invade Bithynia, put Socrates Crestus on the throne, and Nicomedes the fourth would flee to Rome. Um,
So all of these small kingdoms are like the former Seleucid Empire.
Pontus was never controlled by either Alexander or the Seleucids. Neither was Armenia.
Right.
But they are expanding into former Seleucid land. Yes. These are more successor states to the Persian Empire, the Achaemenids, than to the Diadochoi. So in 90 BCE, the Romans sent an army to restore the independence of Cappadocia, which had been reinvaded by the Armenians, um, who were allies of Pontus, by the way, through marriage. Um, and Nicomedes the fourth, restoring both of these things. Mithridates would get angry, but would not really force the issue. He just let it happen. But Marius, always wanting glory, it tells the leader of the Roman expedition, "Hey, stir some shit up. I want to be able to lead an army and get some glory over this stupid Mithridates bloke. I'm gonna kick his ass. uh, the problem was, is while this is happening in 89 BCE, Sulla is the consul, and the consul is usually the guy who gets dibs on the army, unless he wants to send somebody else. And Sulla, of course, wants some glory of his own, so he wants to go. Um, so Marius uses his political support in order to ensure that Sulla does not actually get to go off to fight Mithridates, but instead it would be him. Sulla, of course, is incredibly angry at this and goes to the army, and the army's like, no, we'll follow you actually. And Sulla decides to march on Rome. Yes, an army in Rome. Yeah. Marius is forced to flee to Africa along with many of his supporters, and Sulla's like, okay, we're good now. In the meantime, Mithridates would invade Roman Asia, the former kingdom of Pergamon, uh, and according to Appian, during what is called the Asiatic Vespers, Mithridates would kill 80,000 Romans and Italians that had settled in the area. Mithridates would then invade Greece and temporarily restore Greek independence during the political crisis, but Sulla would quickly come into the area and defeat Mithridates handily. But now that he's, which we should actually be in the next slide now.
Real fast, though, mention that still happened in modern times. If the political leader of a country still had to lead the armies in the battle, like say the president still had to lead the American army into war.
Yeah. 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 Sulla marching on Rome kind of sounds a little familiar to me, but I'm not taking a side, by the way. Both Marius and Sulla were egotistical pricks. They both suck. They both suck. So while Sulla is away from the city, Marius and his allies return. And because of this, they set up an army under a dude named Lucius Valerius Flaccus to not only defeat Mithridates, but also to apprehend Sulla. Flaccus would cross the Bosporan Strait, but not very popular amongst his troops. He'd die in a mutiny led by Flavius Fimbria, who would actually, after this, recapture Pergamon, causing Mithridates to flee the area. And he actually was like, hey, Sulla, you want to help me out and take out Mithridates? And Sulla's like, no, I'm coming after you. Because you were sent to take care of me. So this causes Fimbria to kill himself by falling on his own sword because he knows he can't win. After this, Sulla quickly concludes peace with Mithridates, essentially being like, I can't deal with you right now. I have to go back to Rome real quick to deal with Marius. And this begins the Sullan Civil War.
Civil War, you say?
Yes, the first Civil War. unless you count the social war as a civil war. Next slide. So while Sulla was gone and Marius returns, Marius would ultimately kill a bunch. Well, not Marius. Marius's soldiers would kill a bunch of Sulla's supporters, including a dude named Gnaeus Octavius. Yes, related to later Emperor Augustus. Um, lots of people related to future people. Um, so Marius was getting ready to go deal with Sulla, but he dies in 86 BC, leaving the leadership of the Marians to a guy named Lucius Cornelius Cinna, um, who sort of tries to stay in Rome and uh, consolidate the situation. But Sulla, in 82 BCE, arrives in Italy and decides to march on Rome again. In this army, by the way, is the later politician Pompey the Great, who's marching on uh, Rome, violating the Pomerium, by the way, which is the sacred boundary of Rome that armies aren't allowed to go through. But yeah, he goes through. He marches on Rome. Uh, Marius's supporters are forced to flee or get killed. He ends up declaring himself dictator and beginning prescriptions. Julius Caesar, by the way, was on one of the lists because he was related by marriage to Cinna, but Sulla was persuaded not to have him killed. According to the historians of the time, Sulla said, "In this man there are many Mariuses," about Julius Caesar. I don't think that's true. I think that's later embellishment because Caesar becomes, well, Caesar. 1,500 nobles were executed in these prescriptions, and up to as many as 9,000 people were killed. Yeah, Sulla, bad guy.
Well, it's a good thing that no Roman army ever marched on Rome ever again after that.
Yeah. uh, so in his time as dictator, he is actually going to try to solve the problems of the republic, which mostly he sees as issues with the plebeian tribunes and the Senate not having enough power. So Sulla would reduce the powers of the plebeian tribune. They can no longer introduce legislation on their own or revoke the ability and revoking the ability of veto of the tribunes. He would increase the number of magistrates elected, all in an attempt to make it so that the Senate was no longer a body of 300 men, but of 600 men, um, increasing the amount of senators. Senators were re-given the authority over the courts, um, and a lot of people talk about what's called the cursus honorum, this idea that at a certain age you become a certain magistrate and you have to become a certain magistrate before you can become another one. That was sort of a tradition, but Sulla makes it official. Um, he also revokes the ability for consuls and praetors to command armies. So no longer while you're the consul will you command armies. Instead, you will do it as a governor after you leave office, which I guess was his attempt to try to make sure Marius doesn't happen again. But it's a very bad idea. And we find that out later when certain people like Pompey the Great and Julius Caesar go and become governors and get incredibly loyal legions because of this. Um, because now the legions will be dispersed amongst the provinces as well. By the way, um, yeah, he's attempting to solve an issue by creating a new issue.
So
Um,
what year? So what year is this? What year are we ending this episode
this
on?
is 82 BCE.
All right.
Uh, the actions of Caesar and Gaul are like about 30 years away. Um, so yeah, in 81 BCE, Sulla would resign, disband his legions, and would be elected for consul of 80 BCE. And we'll see if Sulla's reforms work in the next episode. Uh, Hint: they do not.
Spoilers.
Spoiler. They don't. The Republic was screwed. Sort of as soon as this period begins, but
Awesome. So did you learn anything new when you're studying for this that you didn't know before?
no, I'm incredibly smart. Yeah, no, I knew about all of this stuff going in. Just getting the specific details down so that I could have talked about this.
Right. Well, you may
Though this
have.
pe-
Sorry.
though this period used to be like my weakest on Roman history, I don't know. It's smashed in between some of the cooler periods. You got the Punic Wars before it. You got Julius Caesar mucking about after it, and why care about Marius and Sulla other than the fact that Sulla becomes dictator and Marius makes the legions, you know? But like,
But only probably because maybe it's this actions that they're making it that causes Caesar to come to power in the first place.
yeah, but I mean, I was a kid. I didn't really care about that.
Well, most of you don't care about as kids, but for audience and people, as you may notice, we are doing the history with beat episodes on Thursdays from now on because
Yeah,
scheduling conflicts.
yeah.
So
Sorry.
so 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 this will be history episodes will be on the the final Thursday of every month from now on for those who want to keep on track of it. And this time too, hopefully I will be more alert and awake in the morning. Like will
Yeah.
today, not listen to something boring before stream that cocks me up. Anyways, so what do we look forward to next month in January?
Uh, so the Republic sort of stabilizes, but then a couple of generals decide to uh ruin it all. Three generals to be exact. Technically all because this one dude doesn't want to let them do anything because he doesn't like them. And Rome burns because of this.
Mhm.
I think a certain person is responsible for the death of the Republic, and I don't think it's Caesar. I think it's somebody else, but we'll talk about him
All right.
next episode.
Well, we'll learn all that at that more in our 13th, no 12th, yeah 12th season next year. Not only are we going to continue Roman Empire, but also I'm starting a new mini series with with Landon where we're talking about BE before Earth. What happened before we were a planet? Come to that series and find out.
Whoa.
It's like BC, but BE. But anyways, all right. Thank you for being on again.
Of course. Gives me
So
something to do.
yeah, so I forget. Are we going all the way to? Are we going all the way to the Eastern Empire, or we need to end the death of the Western Empire?
I guess that's up to you.
Uh, I guess. Well, I'm up for everything. I'm up for as far as we can go. Stretch this out.
Okay. And we can go to 1453.
Yeah, and then like empires like yep, cool. We're going to when the Ottomans say nope, no more Rome. It's us now.
Well, technically, the Ottomans just said we're Rome now. But yeah. By the way, this idea that empires only last 250 years, Rome is a big giant asterisk to that. By the way, that's a stupid number. It's made by a dude who cherry picked history and stuff. Rome lasts for like 1,000 years, and then if you want to count the Ottomans on top of that, 2,000 years. Most people do not count the Ottomans on top of that. I do it in a memeing fashion because I think it's funny. But the Roman Empire ended in 1922.
We'll get to that next year, but until
Yeah.
then,
All right. Yeah.
until then, never stop learning. And enjoy the randomness. We'll see y'all next time. Bye.
See you.